This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the women's room where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. My guest today is Julie Bursek of the Channel Islands Marine Sanctuary and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Julie is a team lead for education and outreach and the unit diving supervisor. She also has spent over 30 years conducting scientific investigations of the offshore, shallow, subtidal, and intertidal systems of the Southern California Bight, including the Channel Islands. So I'm going to have you say hello, Julie, and then tell us what constitutes the Southern California Bight.
Well, good afternoon, Kathleen. Thank you so much for having me on your show today. The Southern California Bight constitutes the area from Point Conception down to the Mexican border. It's sort of like a cutout in the California coastline because our coastlines sort of go from an east-west facing sort of orientation to a north-south orientation.
Uh-huh. Okay.
You can see it on a map if you look at the map of California.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have looked at that. So we're at Ventura. What, are we just at the beginning of it, or?
We're up. Well, Point Conception is north of Ventura, so beyond Santa Barbara, like when you drive up 101 and you go in towards the Gaviota, that tunnel. If you ever drive up that way, that's where Point Conception is. So that's kind of where the Point or Southern California Bight begins.
Oh, okay.
And it includes the 8 Channel Islands that we have off of our coast. That's within the Southern California Bight.
Oh, okay. Well, good to know. I asked Julie here today to talk about blue carbon sequestration, some very fancy words. And if you're like me, you probably haven't heard about this cool way that the ocean can help us clean our atmosphere and mitigate climate change. But before we get to those tantalizing words and what they mean, I'd like Julie to tell us first about the mission of NOAA and then a little background on herself so we know more about the woman the federal government employs to help protect our oceans and our planet. So why do we have a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration? What's its function and mission?
NOAA holds key leadership roles in shaping international ocean, fisheries, climate, space, and weather policies. And NOAA has many assets to conduct this work, including research programs, vessels, satellites, science centers,
oh my gosh,
laboratories, and a vast pool of distinguished and scientists and experts. And the mission really is to understand and predict changes to the climate, weather, ocean, and coasts, and to share that knowledge and information with others so that we can conserve and manage our coastal marine ecosystems and resources. And the work that NOAA does extends beyond our national borders. It's really an international collaboration and in monitoring global weather and climate. And so NOAA works with partners around the world, and we work closely with other nations because it's, we're on this one Earth together. And we need to advance our ability to predict and respond to changes in climate and other environmental challenges that we're currently facing, so that we can try to, understand what could be impacting our natural resources, human life, and our economic vitality.
Wow. Okay, big task. So why did you choose to be a marine biologist?
Well, it all started when I was a little girl, and we used to sail. My family had a sailboat, and we'd go sailing. And my dad taught me to sail, and our boat was called the Lanakai. And some of my fondest memories came from sailing. And that's when I really spent a lot of time on the water. And then when we weren't on the water, I was at the beach and exploring the tide pools and rocks. And I've always loved the sound of the ocean. I've always been curious about it. So when I was in high school, I had a fantastic marine biology teacher who encouraged me to follow my passion for the ocean and pursue marine science as a potential career pathway. And I'm really glad I followed her advice. I've always, like I said, I've been interested in the ecology. I just learning about it more and studying it for my career, and now I'm in this career around trying to protect the ocean. It's just fascinating to me, and I love the fact that my career offers me constant opportunities to learn and explore this ocean off our coast and to see wildlife in its natural setting.
Okay, well, it's a wonderful explanation, and kudos to teachers. They sometimes get a bad rap, but boy, you remember that teacher who, gives you encouragement in a certain area. Okay,
Absolutely.
since you are involved in NOAA education, tell me just briefly, so we don't run out of time, about what you teach and some of the format you might use.
Sure. So our programs, we have education outreach programs, and they really are to increase awareness and about our marine and cultural and maritime heritage resources of the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. And so we would work with a variety of partners at other agencies or with aquariums and museums or with public education to to enhance this awareness and increase appreciation for the environment that we're surrounded by. So this is through teacher workshops or high school mentoring programs. We do floating lab programs aboard our research vessel, the Shearwater. We also have been involved in some live interactive programming, especially the last few years with before COVID and then especially during COVID. And then we also try to promote the work that's going on our larger NOAA research vessels when they cruise along our coast and do some of our research work for us.
Okay, wow. So today we're going to talk about some very important and very hopeful oceanic research by another woman, Sarah Hutto, also a NOAA affiliate. She is the Conservation and Climate Program Coordinator with the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. So her research is about blue carbon sequestration. This research confirms that the ocean can actually help heal the planet. Would you tell us what these words mean in layman terms?
Sure. Well, so what we're finding is that coastal and marine ecosystems play a significant role in the global carbon cycle, sequestering or pulling out and storing carbon out of the atmosphere, and this is over long time scales. And so the reason they're referred to as blue carbon ecosystems, it's involving the ocean. And what we're learning and with the work that Sarah Hutto has done is that they can really help mitigate climate change and its impacts by facilitating the uptake of atmospheric carbon dioxide into the ocean, and then they can transport that carbon into the sediments or deep waters and where it can remain indefinitely if undisturbed.
Oh, okay. So had you suspected this was the case, or is this like totally new research?
There's been some work that has been done in coastal systems, but not so much in the ocean or looking at the oceanic systems. And we're starting to learn more about that and trying to sort of quantify what does that mean, to sequester carbon and and what's that measurement look like. So that's what Sarah spent a lot of her time on and to develop this sort of blue carbon methodology
Uh-huh.
and looking at what the current research that's been done on it.
Okay. So why is CO2 or carbon dioxide gas contributing to climate change?
Well, human activities are changing Earth's climate. We do have natural processes, and when we exhale our breath, we're breathing out carbon dioxide, and that's considered the regular carbon. But the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas also creates carbon dioxide. And this is referred to as rampant carbon, and it's produced at rates and in amounts that the Earth system isn't able to manage without changing. And so as a result, we've had rampant CO2 buildup in our atmosphere, and it's warming our planet and our ocean. And it's estimated that the concentration of CO2 now is a third higher than CO2 levels before modern industrialization and fossil fuels began. So that's a lot. It's a big difference. And so this buildup of excess atmospheric carbon dioxide acts like a heat trapping blanket around the world, which disrupts the climate. And the ocean is the largest natural carbon sink in the world, and it accumulates about 20 to 35% of the atmospheric carbon dioxide and plays a significant role in the global carbon cycle by storing and cycling 93% of the Earth's carbon dioxide, and also storing half of the world's biological carbon in living marine organisms. So
Oh,
we can
wow.
mitigate climate change or lessen its severity by reducing greenhouse gas concentrations through processes that move carbon of the atmosphere or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the point here is the ocean has a huge role in this that we're just
Oh,
starting to understand more.
okay. What I'm wondering is What process occurs that takes it out of the atmosphere? Does it like just automatically sink into the ocean, or is there sort of an evaporation process? And what does our friend the ocean then do with the carbon?
That's a great question. So if photosynthesis, it's a concept we learned in science, basic science, and we know that trees are good at doing photosynthesis, which means removing carbon dioxide naturally. And by doing that, then they produce oxygen. Well, the ocean also absorbs carbon dioxide in two ways. One is photosynthesis, because we have phytoplankton and algae in the ocean. So they do the same sort of absorbing the CO2 from the atmosphere and then releasing oxygen. But the ocean absorbs CO2 through diffusion from the atmosphere, where the difference in pressure between the CO2 in the atmosphere and the ocean causes the carbon dioxide to be exchanged. So I'm saying CO2, that's also carbon dioxide. I'm sorry if I keep mingling. Our ocean waves help to mix that carbon dioxide in the shallow water and then into and out into deeper water. And so it's
Oh,
great at absorbing that carbon dioxide from the air. Covers, 70% of our Earth. It's got a big role there. It's a crucial role.
right. Wow. Very interesting. And so we also checked with Sarah Hutto, and she said that all marine organisms contribute to sequestration just by way of sinking. Could you expand for your listener some of the types of organisms that sink with their carbon, and how long will the carbon they hold be secured down in the murky depths?
So yeah, all the organisms. So not only just like kelp and sea, the plants and algae of the ocean, but also fish and whales and invertebrates. So when these organisms die, they tend to sink to the bottom, and even plankton. So when plankton dies, it's often referred to as marine snow, and it slowly goes through the water column and settles down the bottom. When it gets below 1,000 meters, it's basically taken out of the carbon equation. It's deep, it's going to go into the sediments where it can be buried. And so that carbon is no longer part of that equation. And so it's taking that carbon out of the system.
Okay.
So pretty much everything in the ocean.
Right, like the critters and seashells and so forth, everything. It
Yeah.
absorbs some carbon, then dies and sinks. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, Sarah Hutto's research is mainly on two coastal habitats, the seagrass and water marshes habitats, and then another habitat, remarkably, is whales. So let's start with the coastal habitats of seagrasses and salt marshes, and we'll talk about the amazing whales after that. So how do these coastal transition areas help absorb carbon?
So kelps and seagrasses and salt marshes, they all absorb inorganic carbon dioxide and they fix that carbon into their tissues. And so then when it's in their tissue, so then if the kelp, let's say for example kelp, if the kelp material is exported from the subtidal rocky reefs to the deep sea environment, it can be buried in the sediments. And so then that's taking that carbon is being stored there. Carbon storage in seagrasses and salt marshes occur when dead seagrass and salt marsh plants get trapped in the oxygen-free sediments. They have this sort of an intricate complexity of rhizomes and roots that kind of holds it into place. And so it can remain captured there indefinitely if it's left undisturbed. And so that's an example of a blue carbon coastal ecosystem. So they're facilitating the uptake of the atmospheric carbon dioxide, and they transport the carbon into sediments or into deep waters.
Okay. So seagrasses include plants like the kelp and other seaweed. Could you tell us a little about the special capability of kelp and its effectiveness in absorbing carbon?
Yeah, so kelp is really kind of is a really great, it's a marine algae, and it photosynthesizes just like plants, like the seagrasses, but it's a totally different organism altogether. It grows much more rapidly, like a couple feet a day, which I think is pretty amazing. And so it's really effective at absorbing carbon dioxide.
Okay, well, and we're just going to leave that there for a minute because we have to do a station ID. This is KPPQ LP Ventura 104.1 FM, and we're in the women's room where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. My guest today is Julie Bursek, of the Channel Islands Marine Sanctuary and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I asked Julie here today to talk about blue carbon sequestration. So stay with us as we discuss this hopeful intervention by our ocean to mitigate greenhouse gases. Okay, and we're back, and we were just talking about kelp. Now, a kelp grows really, really rapidly. That also helps absorb more carbon.
Actually, it's amazing. It's about 40% of the annual sequestration comes from our kelp. So that's pretty significant.
Oh, wow, wow. So acquaint your listener with how these two habitats extract an amazing amount of carbon and hold it. And you just said that that's about 40% of all the carbon, or 40% of carbon over the ocean, or how is that
40,
measured?
of its annual 40% of the total carbon in our kelp forests to have that ability to do 40% of that sequestration.
Okay. So I read the amount of how much carbon is sequestered in coastal habitats, and that was measured as 175,000 megagrams. Like me, I'm sure many of our listeners do not understand how much a megagram of carbon is. So what is this amount in terms of tons, a measurement that we all can grasp pretty easily?
Understand that it can be confusing to hear these different measurements, but if you look at the 175,000 megagrams of carbon, that is the equivalent of 18,150 metric tons of carbon dioxide.
Wow. Yeah.
And it can be the equivalent of, like, I think each ton is like the equivalent of 0.2 vehicle emissions. So you can kind of try to even convert it into everyday terms that we are just uses that we have with our cars and our emissions and things like that. So there's all sorts of conversion factors you can use.
Okay, so what would happen if these sediments got destroyed, or got stirred up or dug out or taken away? How much carbon might be released into the atmosphere?
Well, it is estimated it would be about 643,000 metric tons,
Holy
or the
cow.
equivalent of adding 140,000 vehicles to our road for a year. So that's significant.
Yeah, really. Okay. So this would be a very good reason for preserving our sanctuaries and coastal habitats, and also a practical application of Sarah Hutto's research, right?
That is correct. Yeah, I think we can use this information to make that argument that we really need to think about the role that these different habitats and places have in mitigating climate change. So, like not plowing over our wetlands, for example, or taking out salt marshes,
Yeah,
because these different habitat components all have a role to play.
right. Like not developing, resort complexes right on the coast, right on top of
Mhm.
a salt marsh. Okay, well, let's talk about the whales a little bit. How do these huge mammals hold and sequester carbon? And then also tell us what a whale fall is.
So there's some literature that's out there, some work that's been done on the southern pilot whale, that's really interesting. And basically, there's three mechanisms that the work demonstrates. One is this idea of a whale pump, and then a whale conveyor belt, and whale falls. So the whale pump and the whale conveyor belt are indirect sort of processes that whales are involved in, that result in carbon sequestration. So it's actually driven by whale defecation at the surface. So when whales defecate, they release nutrients such as nitrogen, iron, and phosphorus into the water column, and that will then stimulate local phytoplankton growth that is super productive. And so the whale pump describes the vertical movement of whales. So it's like the sperm whales, when they go down, they actually are adapted to go really deep into the ocean, and they have these feeding grounds down there. But then they have to come up to breathe, and when they come back up, that's when they go ahead and defecate at the surface. And because of their deep sea physiological adaptations to deep sea diving, they're unable to defecate down at depth. So they have to do this at the surface. And so this biological response ensures that nutrients are dispersed at the surface where light is available for phytoplankton growth. And remember, plankton can also absorb that carbon dioxide. So then whale migration, because they also migrate, all whales migrate, right? So they're going from nutrient-rich cold waters to maybe some warmer water areas like the tropics that are nutrient poor. And then, but they're going to vacate everywhere. And that's going to also then support phytoplankton growth in those nutrient poor research or regions. And so there's this research has shown that 240,000 tons of carbon dioxide is removal is facilitated by sperm whales just by their natural history and the way that they are adapted to live in the ocean. And that's just in the Southern Ocean, because that's where this work was done. Because it's promoting phytoplankton growth. And then we know the phytoplankton will absorb that CO2. And then when they die, they also then sequester carbon in the sediments below. And so the final thing is the whale fall. So what is a whale fall? So when a whale dies, it then sinks to the ocean floor. That's direct carbon sequestration. So that means that whatever carbon was stored in that large animal is now then taken out of the equation because it's going to sink down to the deep ocean bottom. And then some of the carbon stored in their tissues can be captured in the deep for millennia. And then they're large size, they're long lives, and not a lot eats whales, right? So they are able to store carbon, a significant amount of carbon during their life cycle.
So it's almost like the whales fertilize the ocean so the plankton can grow, putting cow manure or something on a field. And this is also very similar to how forests and marshlands and wetlands take carbon out of the atmosphere the way the ocean does it. Is that a correct way of thinking?
That is a correct way of thinking. It's the same processes, the leaves on a plant will absorb, they're doing the photosynthesis and then they die, they settle to the forest floor. That carbon then is taken out of the system as well. So, and even the trunks of the trees, they're learning a lot about even sequoias. And so you think about how long lived a sequoia tree is and how much carbon is taken up through its span of life over a few hundred years. So it's yes, they have a significant role to play, but we can find those equivalents in the ocean.
Okay, so what does it mean in the sequestering in dollar terms? Can this be saving a lot of money for taxpayers if we take care of our coastal areas and our kelp forests and our whales?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Sarah's research and her case study looking at carbon sequestration in the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. I mean, she estimated that both coastal and oceanic carbon sequestration processes accumulate 4,950 megagrams of carbon per year. And that's the equivalent of 18,150 metric tons of carbon dioxide, which still equals $925,650 in societal benefits annually. And that's just talking about Greater Farallones. It's not looking at the whole ocean along the West Coast. So you can imagine doing some of these case studies in the different national marine sanctuaries that we have, and that dollar amount gets a lot larger. So she provides some examples in this really cool story map, and one of the ones that caught my eye was she said that seagrasses store 75,880 megagrams of carbon, and if destroyed, it would be the equivalent of adding, on average, 60,509 passenger vehicles or burning 31 million gallons of gasoline. So the annual accumulation of carbon in those seagrass habitats in the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary is equivalent to removing 593 passenger vehicles from the road each year, or preventing the burning of 218,000 gallons of gasoline each year.
A really big amount that it saves. Okay, by
Yes.
understanding carbon sequestration in marine sanctuaries, we can learn how to manage changes to stored carbon, which has national and global climate relevance. Why especially is it important to have protected areas like marine sanctuaries so that we can do research? I mean, can't you do research anywhere?
Yes, you could. But I would say that we have 5 national marine sanctuaries along the west coast of North America. We have 1 in Olympic Coast and then 4 in California. So it's Greater Farallones, Cordell Bank, Monterey, and Channel Islands. And if you look at a map, you go, why are there 5 national marine sanctuaries along this west coast? Well, it's the entire west coast of North America is a California current large marine ecosystem, and it's known for high primary productivity of plankton. And then because of these wind-driven upwelled conditions that occur off the coast. And so this translates to lush kelp forests, seagrasses, salt marshes, and it's an important migration destination for seabirds and large whales to come and feed. And so given the great diversity and complexity of these different ecosystems along our coast, and especially in national marine sanctuaries where we have resources that we can focus to study these areas and learn more about them, it's important for us to we need to understand these various processes that result in carbon sequestration, and that will demonstrate more broadly the role that marine protected areas can play in reaching carbon mitigation goals in the United States and around the world.
Okay, so what do we as caretakers and we as lay people of the planet and its oceans have to do to ensure that this process is unimpeded, this process of continuing to learn?
Right. So we need to better understand the role of the ocean and the marine life within it towards maintaining the balance of life on Earth as we know it. And through NOAA, we serve as trustees to these special ocean places. And it's our role to help increase awareness about these places and to understand the connection that we have to the ocean and the ocean has to us. I mean, really healthy oceans mean healthy people, and we depend on the ocean. And more than ever now, the healthy function is in value. The healthy function of ocean ecosystems is invaluable to local communities and to local economies as well.
Okay, so are there plans to do research on other sea plants and animals like I was thinking sharks or dolphins or those big old sea turtles that live a century? They must have a lot of carbon collected.
Yeah, and so I think there is a case that can be made for all marine life and its role in carbon sequestration. And the bigger point here is that I think we need to ensure that we maintain ecosystem integrity and within these different coastal and oceanic habitats, because they have an important role in mitigating the impacts from climate change. And when a habitat is in stress or in decline, like the giant kelp and pole kelp forests of Northern California, its impact can be far-reaching, not only to the marine life that depends on it, but also to people. I mean, the extent of kelp forests off Northern California coast is now only 6,400 meters squared. In 2008, the extent was over 2.4 million meters squared. So
Okay.
yeah, we need to have those habitats to help with this climate problem we're facing.
Okay, so quickly, where can listeners find more information on blue carbon sequestration and on NOAA? If you could give
So
us their website.
sure. So go to sanctuaries.noaa.gov, and if you look under science and the conservation, conservation, you'll see there's a whole there's part 1 of the blue carbon and marine protected areas and part 2 where you can find a lot more detail about the information we've been discussing today. There's also on that same website, there's a story map that talks about the blue carbon and marine protected areas, and it goes in much greater detail than we've been able to today on just the role of coastal habitats and oceanic processes, and it provides some examples, including some of the whales and fish and kelp forests and seagrasses, so listeners can really roll up their sleeves and dig in more to learn more about this topic.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Julie Bursek of NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, for coming in to tell our listeners about this marvelous way our oceans can actually relieve us of a massive amount of carbon in our atmosphere, thereby reducing greenhouse gases and mitigating climate change. This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the women's room where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good.